This is Suchitra Vijayan, and you're joining us for the Polis Project's Community Conversations. The Indian national elections have been the largest electoral exercise in the world ever since the first national elections in 1952. Often we hear stories of the Election Commission setting up a single voting booth in the country's most interior regions for a single voter to come in and cast his vote. But this great and largest exercise in the world is far from perfect. Of late, a series of concerns have been raised by the Indian elections democratic process. Is it fair? Is it transparent? Is it free from political control and interference? Joining us today are three accomplished speakers who will talk to us about the electoral bonds, the vulnerability of the EVM and VVPAT machines, the broader failures of institutions like the courts and election commissions, and serious concerns of data security and privacy. About the conversation today, unlike our dispatches series, today it's more about listening from these scholars, journalists, and experts and the work that they've done. I will quickly introduce each of these speakers, and each of them will speak for between 10 and 15 minutes, and followed by which we'll open it up for questions from our audience. We already have close to 22 questions, and we are hoping to make the session something valuable so that all of you can keep bringing in your questions and have those questions answered. The ways in which you can ask the questions is if you're listening and joining in through the Facebook Live or YouTube, you can send in your questions through the comment box. If you're joining us through Twitter, then definitely tweet at the Polis Project's handle. The first speaker today is Poonam Agarwal. Poonam Agarwal is an editor of investigations of the Sprint. She has exposed the electoral bonds scheme. That is how the government is secretly policing opposition political parties' donations by making entire political donation process opaque in 2018. Recently, she has reported on a series of stories on the EVMs, the VVPATs, and how they are vulnerable to manipulation. Based on a series of RTI documents, she has unearthed that private engineers were engaged by the EC in the 2017 and 18 elections. She's also a winner of the Award for Journalists and won the Ramnath Goneka Award for Investigative Journalism, the Best Investigative Journalist for the News Television Award, and the CNN Young Journalist Award, among others. Today, she will be talking to us about the electoral bonds, how opacity in political donations are harmful for democracy, how the impact machines are vulnerable for manipulations. Poonam, thank you so much for joining us in the next 15 minutes as well.
Thank you, Suchitra, for this introduction. It was a great introduction. To begin with, electoral bonds. Electoral bonds, for those who do not know what it is a promissory note which was introduced by the government, and it was during late Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. He introduced this electoral bonds with the promise that electoral bonds will protect the identity of the donor. That was the reason why it was brought in. And secondly, what he also said that electoral bonds, if a political donor wants to donate to a particular political party, he does not need to donate in cash. He can purchase this bond and hand it over to the political party, which he can the political party can encash through this electoral bond. So making the entire donation in white transaction, not in black money. So this was the promise which was made by the government when it was introduced. And secondly, they also said that the donors are very scared of making political donations because they fear that if at all the other political party get to know, they might get arm twisted or threatened. So these are the points which were made by the government while introducing it. Now, coming to the point that was it essential and is electoral bond actually protecting the identity of the donors? Now, the point is that when I started working on this story, this was way back in 2018. The first tranche of electoral bonds was sold in March. So during that time, we actually spoke about it. I went to SBI, State Bank of India is the only bank which can actually sell electoral bonds. So I went and spoke to the officials and wanted to know more about electoral bonds. He then told me that there is nothing on the electoral bond which would reveal the identity of the donor. The name of the donor is not there, nothing. It is just the date of purchase which is mentioned. For example, if it is purchased on 1st of April 2018, then it will be mentioned. Fine. So I wrote an article on that initially, a text piece on explaining what electoral bonds, and it is actually protecting. But somewhere I was not convinced. We regularly, my seniors and other people in office, we regularly used to have conversation. Is this system actually happening that no donor will be revealed, the names would not be revealed? So finally, we decided to purchase one electoral bonds. And then what we gathered that electoral bonds are having hidden numbers in it. So which was alphanumeric and unique. What was the need? It was my question. Why do you need to keep unique number, alphanumeric number in electoral bonds? That too hidden. By hidden, I mean that you cannot actually see the number while purchasing it. You can see it only under ultraviolet ray. And this thing I got to know only after I sent the bond for in the forensic lab for testing. There it was. This fact came out. Now, hundreds of questions were raised, of course, and the government was also caught red handed on electoral bonds. And then, when we asked the government that what is the reason for this unique number, you said that nothing is there to reveal the identity. Now, when these bonds are sold, so definitely somebody is noting the number. And when I give it back to the political, and when I give it to the political party, and political party give it back to the SBI, certainly they can check the number, and the number with the number they can, whatever data they have regarding the donor will be exposed. So this was the secret policing which the government was doing, but they never admitted on record that the real purpose of it. Rather, they always mentioned that it was for security reasons. And let me also just tell you here the security reason which they said, apart from unique alphanumeric number, there were hundreds of watermark on this. So there were other watermarks which could actually tell you about the fact that whether the electoral bond was genuine or fake. So technically there was no reason. And mind you here that even Indian currencies do not have such unique numbers. It is for the first time that we found any promissory note or currency or any other document which is carrying this unique number. And it was told by one of the former director of Reserve Bank of India. So obviously a PIL was filed, and later on many things came out through RTIs, and there was a series of reports on the fact that the SBI was actually noting down these alphanumeric numbers before it was sold to anybody. So this opacity, the donor's identity will not be revealed, nothing of this sort was happening. So the question is why the government is not why the government brought this thing out, and the more importantly, the donors, the donors of electoral bonds, their names will not be revealed to the Election Commission of India. Why? People have every right to know who are these political donors, but as per the act, the policy, the amendments which were made, the political donor, the political party, in their audit report, they just need to mention the total amount which they receive through electoral bonds, and they do not have to reveal the identity of the donor, which makes the entire political donation opaque. And it's a big problem in any democracy. So this is one aspect which is a big problem in the Indian election. Coming to EVM and VVPATs. EVM and VVPATs, my journey with this particular story started post elections 2000, Lok Sabha elections 2019. It was during the Lok Sabha elections 2019, and I would like to give credit to one of my sources who had been really helpful to me all through my stories, and he was the first person to flag that the votes poll data and votes counted data of elections are not matching. And it was not just in Lok Sabha, but the elections prior to that, which happened in Madhya Pradesh elections and Maharashtra elections, during that time also, the votes polled and votes counted data did not match. Now, this is an important thing for a simple reason that how can Election Commission declare any result without getting the final numbers of vote counted and vote polled? The mismatch was a big question to which the Election Commission never gave any clear answer. They did not tell us. They just said that the process takes times, and it is like they need to talk to several ROs and returning officers. They will send the several data, compile it together, and then only the results are declared. So that process takes time. And actually, the Election Commission, I reported this story after the results were declared in around, if I remember correctly, in May 2019. end of May 2019. And the actual report, the compiled report, was put up by the Election Commission in around September, October 2019. So the Election Commission is technically saying that they are declaring results on provisional data, which is not final data. So on this also, there is one petition which is pending in the Supreme Court. So there are technically two petitions pending in the Supreme Court, on which Prasanna will elaborate as to what is the fate of these petitions. Now, EVM and VVPATs being, malfunctioning is another aspect about which I have been working on. First thing, the RTI revealed that private engineers from a company which is based in Maharashtra, they were engaged by the ECIL, who happens to be the manufacturer of EVM VVPAT. Now, the Election Commission had always been claiming that authorized engineers are being engaged by ECIL and BEL, who happens to be the manufacturing companies. Now, the point is, what do you mean by authorized engineers? Are they regular employees or they are contractuals? This is something they never clarified, but they always maintain this, that authorized engineers are being have the access to the EVM VVPATs. Now the question is that these engineers, they have the access to EVM VVPATs throughout before at least 6 months before the elections, because they need to do the first level checking, and they are involved in counting. They are involved during the polling days. So their involvement is all through and through in the elections. Now the problem is, if we are engaging contractual engineers who are hired for 1 year, 1.5 years, aren't we making the entire election process vulnerable as far as the security of these EVMs and VVPATs are concerned? Because they have complete access to this, and once their contracts are over, they are out in the world. They can use their knowledge, they can do anything, because they have complete knowledge of these EVM VVPATs. And secondly, these engineers are not given proper trainings about EVM VVPATs before they are engaged in any particular election. So these are major problems to which Election Commission, they never ever gave clear answer. We've been asking repeatedly about it. Now, the last thing that I would like to speak about is that EVM VVPAT manipulation. We all know that how EVM and VVPAT, they work. There is a ballot unit and there is a VVPAT machine, which actually shows the slip which comes out of the VVPAT machine, which shows whether you have given the vote has gone to your candidate or not. But please understand that between the wiring of the EVM and VVPAT machines is such that once you press the button on the ballot, the vote first goes to the VVPAT, the slip comes out, and after that it goes to the control unit where your vote is recorded. Now, the vote which are counted on the election, on the counting date, is of the control unit. So the process, the wiring is such that it does not directly goes to the control unit. So when VVPAT was introduced, the fact that the control unit should record the vote first and not the VVPAT machine was clarified in the court and to everybody. But that is now not how it is being worked. There should have been either a parallel wire going from ballot unit to VVPAT machine and another to the control unit, but it is not so, or any other way which the engineers could have clarified. But on this also, there is we have written to the Election Commission. I have written, the former IAS officer Kannan Gopinathan, he has written to the Election Commission. He has not got any reply. It has been 1 year so far. So these are the major questions and the concerns about which I've been reporting, and I will continue to report. And the last thing that I would like to mention, that Election Commission is supposed to save and store the VVPAT slips for 1 year, but they destroyed it within 4 months. And this is something we got to know from RTI, to which Election Commission has not given us an answer yet. I think so, Suchitra, I'm done in 15 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Poonam. That was a tour de force of introduction. And as I kept I've seen, I've heard so much of your reporting, and as you just kept laying out these things, it just kept the dread, the sheer dread of how unaccountable these systems have become was very, very visible. I'll quickly now introduce Srinivas Kodali, who's an independent researcher working on data, governance, and internet. His work focuses on the evolution of technology in India and its impact on democracy. Today, he will be talking to us about some very crucial issues. And again, while Srinivas has been writing about them and speaking about them extensively, has not appeared in mainstream magazines or journalistic portals. He'll be talking about voter profiling data, a series of deletions that have happened, and also the upcoming delimitation commission. So again, Srinivas, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suchitra. So I'm going to continue from where Poonam stopped. So if you look at what's happening in India with the election process, it's increasingly becoming digitized. Even if you look at the issue of electoral bonds, the tracking of the electoral bonds also happens in a secondary way. You're also required to submit your Aadhaar details, your digital ID, when you buy the electoral bonds, right? While the state collects a lot of information about you, they are increasingly making it non-transparent for the citizens. It's very transparent for the state on how this entire process goes. But for an outsider, you will have no idea what's happening, whether it's hiring of the private players or even ECI's role in regulating all of this, right? The primary reason for all of this is ECI as a body only comes up during the elections. It's not a full-time entity. We know the structural issues of the Election Commission. But specifically in regards to the upcoming challenges that are coming up with this digitization of elections, we have seen continuously post-Cambridge Analytica was that there is indeed influence of social media and algorithms in elections, and you don't need to manipulate VVPATs. I'm not saying that one can or can't. It's a black box, so you never know. But it is a known fact that manipulating voters is an attack vector. We have seen it happen in the US elections. We've seen it happen in the Brexit referendum. In 2019, Indian elections was the first elections post Cambridge Analytica where we knew for a fact that manipulation of voters through social media was going to happen. Now, there are different ways one can go about it, but you need to target voters, right? And you need to micro-target them. So you're trying to essentially sell ads or sell your campaign to each voter in a different way. And because of the way how social media marketing happens, it's advertising essentially. You never know who is being targeted and what ads they're showing. While Facebook and some of the other entities, even Twitter, did share a lot of this information of who are the advertisers, there is enough evidence now to show that there are bots and entities which are promoted by a political party which are micro-targeting people. Now, the role of the Election Commission in regulating this election and including the publicity of the election is under the Section 126 of the Representation of the People's Act. If you actually look at the Section 126 of Representation of People's Act, it's a very age-old act, and you're only looking at controlling print and visual media. If you have to issue an ad for print newspapers or in a TV, you actually have to get the Election Commission's approval for your ads. So before an election, all of your material is actually shared with the Election Commission. You get pre-approvals. There is actually a regulated process. But when it came to the social media issue, we have no idea what the Election Commission has done about Cambridge Analytica. There were allegations. The Parliamentary Committee on IT tried to listen to several experts, but we have no report on it. The ECI was supposed to have had some internal meetings. There is no evidence of whatsoever whether it even happened or what the decisions they took. But eventually, running up to the 2019 elections, I believe in 2018, late 2018, we had this Sinha committee. I think I forgot his first name. Mr. Sinha was one of the undersecretaries of the Election Commission or one of the previous election commissioners. who produced this report on how to start regulating social media entities under Section 126 of the Representation of Peoples Act. Now, that's a really interesting report because in all the consultations the Election Commission had with these social media entities, they eventually ended up allowing social media entities to self-regulate themselves. Uh, and the interactions that happened with the Election Commission were not were probably with some of these social media companies, but they actually happened via the Indian Internet and Mobile Association of India, IMAI. Uh, so in 2019 elections, the Election Commission, the arrangement was that the Election Commission would let these platforms know if there is hate speech, and these platforms will voluntarily bring them down. But there were no orders. I think roughly some 1,000 odd URLs or instances of media was removed. But that report of Mr. Sinha committee was never published by the Election Commission. Actually, the arrangement was widely published that Facebook and Twitter are going to self-regulate themselves. They're going to do a bunch of actions. But starting from the report, and we have no idea what the conversations that the Election Commission had with Facebook or Twitter, because they have invoked this condition under which they say it's a third-party communication. The Election Commission is not allowed to share those communication to people under the RTA Act. This is very strange, okay, because the entire communications that the Election Commission has is a public activity. Whether you have it with a government department or have it with a private entity, it doesn't really matter because you're doing a public function. And part of this public function, you're required to be transparent. But no information was applied. Anyway, I'll jump from this to what was a recent trend in the 2019 elections was voter deletions. It's not just micro targeting of voters. If you suddenly realize that you can't manipulate voters, removing voters of the rolls is a very old method that Indian politicians have used. It's not new. All you have to do is probably go to their house before the election day, put some ink. You don't even have to remove them from the electoral rolls. There are various of methods that political parties over time have evolved. But what's tricky now is that post linking Aadhaar with voter ID, the state, the government has come up with ways where it is claiming that there are a lot of duplicate voters and we will eradicate them. And in this process in 2015, the Election Commission linked voter IDs with Aadhaar, and in doing so, it erroneously removed lakhs of voters across the country. My home state of Telangana had voter deletions of approximately 4 million. And on December 2018, during the state elections, before the upcoming union elections in 2019, people came out on the streets in lakhs and were protesting across the state. Right? I mean, it's known that this happened, but there was no investigation by the Election Commission. And you see that in 2019 elections, even every party, right, like the right-wing parties MP, the South Bangalore MP, he was actually complaining, the BJP MP from South Bangalore was complaining that his voters have been deleted. All sites of voters have been deleted because it was a machine which was trying to deduplicate whether voters are genuine or not, and they never really followed the rule of law. By book, if you have to delete someone from the voter list, you have to send these notices under the Representation of Peoples Act. You have to verify them. You have to have public hearings. The Election Commission bypassed all of them. Okay. The problem in all of this is, even though the complaints go to the commission hasn't been acting. Okay, because they actually realize what the problem is and what they have done, but they don't want the commission's image to become negative anywhere. So it's traditional bureaucrats acting in their own ways. Okay, let's not tell people what's actually happened. Now it's making it harder for people to investigate even what has happened when all of these platforms are being digitized and access to these digital platforms are becoming harder. So voter deletions and manipulating of voters by targeting them, micro-targeting them, is now known, established. Now, the problem with this trend is that we're seeing it's not the election commission, but the MHA is now appointed delimitation commissions for the Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir. In Jammu and Kashmir, we had a reorganization of the states, so they are now required to relook at the assembly constituencies. So there needs to be a delimitation commission. Except delimitation commissions are known to be constituted by the election commission, and there is no role of the government in this. But now it was actually the Ministry of Home Affairs in case of Kashmir, which has constituted the committee. I think they also announced a committee for the Northeast. They're trying to bring a law because they realize that there is an issue. If I'm not wrong, the law will be passed in the upcoming sessions. That's important because it's going to take away powers from the election commission on delimitation, and it's going to give it to the government. This has serious implications along with the huge data collections that we plan to do with the National Population Register, where it's very much easier for the government to collect data through census, and you can target voters and your population, right? And see, traditionally, political parties have brought in their welfare politics into governance. So to cater to the voting population, you announce welfare schemes when you're inside the government to target your voter base. Now, that data is circulating between political parties to government, and from government, it's going back to political parties. And by increasingly tracking everyone using their unique IDs, digital IDs, this process has essentially become easier. It's actually covert, it's known, every party is doing it. In fact, one of the political parties in Andhra Pradesh, the Telugu Desam party, was actually caught with the entire state's population's welfare data, Aadhaar numbers, voter IDs, photographs. The opposition party actually filed a complaint with the election commission. It was the YSR Congress party which won the election. It doesn't mean that if you have access to data, you can win the election, you can manipulate and win the election. But definitely the element of using gives you an edge. Your popular politics are a different scenario in essence. But the use of data, and political parties are now believing that it can give them an edge, and everyone wants to have access to it. It doesn't matter who's in power. Everybody's trying to buy this data, steal it in whatever ways, or collect it. Now, this with what's upcoming is the Election Commission's idea of bringing in digital voting. With the pandemic, and we know that it might be really hard to also have an election in the near future, and also to allow migrant voters to vote from their area of place instead of migrating or traveling to their constituency to vote for the day. They're trying to experiment this blockchain-based voting. So, I mean, it's frankly speaking, all of this is a nightmarish scenario for me. Because none of these systems are transparent. And you need each of the election procedures to be transparent at every stage, not just at the end, at the counting, or just at the voting place, right? So digitization makes it less transparent, and it actually gives away control from the citizen. And it's also giving away control from the election commission, and it's giving control to the government. I'll just end it there.
Srinivas, thank you so much for that. Again, it feels like the dystopia is already here. I will quickly now introduce our final speaker of the day. We have Prasanna S. He's a Delhi-based independent law practitioner who is an advocate on record in the Supreme Court. He's a founding trustee of Article 21 Trust and Project Constitutionalism. What he's going to be talking today and addressing today is the EVM and the VVPAT litigations, and his experience as a counting agent for an independent candidate in the recently concluded Delhi elections. And the final issue he's going to address is the structural issues of the institutions of the Election Commission and why it has not been able to enforce the model code of conduct and etc. in a non-partisan manner. Prasanna, thank you so much for joining us, and the next 15 minutes is yours.
Thank you very much, Suchitra, for having me here. So one of the questions that you asked Poonam, and I think you did ask that question to Srinivas, why is it that many of the stories that Poonam and others have reported have not found its way to the mainstream press? One of the obvious reasons is that if they don't ask the right questions, they'll never get the right answers, right? We have to look at the questions that the Indian press asks now in the larger context of movement towards traditional fascism that we've seen of the affairs of the Indian state, right? Where one of the punctuating attributes of such a movement is this constant shifting of burden. And we see this, the press's conduct in the case of questioning election commission is also one of that, where whenever there's these questions of VVPAT slips count not matching the the poll count, etc. All of these questions, when they are raised, it's almost always you have an army of journalists coming out in support of the election commission, saying, so now where have you got any proof that there is any tampering of elections? Have you got any proof? But that's a very low threshold for the election commission to satisfy, right? In my mind, there are four thresholds. So the larger principle here is that the elections should not only be not only be neutral, and they should not only be fair, but they should also be seen to be free and fair, right? So as far as that threshold is concerned, what something that I've spoken about earlier is the 4-tier model. So when you're operating at tier 1, you're operating saying that there isn't adequate proof that the elections have been compromised or manipulated, particularly when technology is adopted. So there is, at one level, you say, okay, there is no proof that there is the EVM machines are tampered or the VVPATs are tampered or no election is compromised. Right? The second one is for a healthy skeptic to come in to say the elections are not tamperable. Right? That is to say, you need to also satisfy a reasonable skeptic that it is not tamperable. The third level is where you say that the large experts agree that with the technology, not only of today, but for eternity, the process is sufficiently secure that the results, the outcomes are fair outcomes or the correct outcomes, right? The fourth level is where even a reasonable lay person is able to satisfy himself that the outcomes of the elections are fair, and the general conduct has also been free, right? If we take this 4-level model, so this is although this is not how the German Constitutional Court articulated it when it struck down Germany also tried using electronic voting machines for their process, and the Constitutional Court actually struck it down, and for a reason, and it kind of articulated its reasons in I'm just paraphrasing it in my own way. Where it said even a lay person should be able to satisfy himself that the outcomes are fair. So if that is the question that we ask, then we come up with a different answer in the Indian context, right? So we've had Supreme Court judgments that have said, see, Indian state now under the Indian Constitution has to move from a culture of authority to culture of justification. We come back, when we ask many questions of the state, whether it is be of the Election Commission or of the Indian government or even of the Supreme Court, right? We never get justification. We always get a culture of authority. We have the power. You show us how is it that we don't have the power. So normally, even in these litigation, what I noticed was that Election Commission, in all its responses, in all its replies, so the line it takes is that, see, we are a constitutional body under Article 324. We know how to do our job. People don't have to tell us how to do our job. We are an independent body. Several Supreme Court judgments have recognized how great a job that the Election Commission has done for the country of India's size, and therefore, we will need to rest on all those accolades for some more time. How is it that you ask all these questions? That is the kind of line that they take even during our litigation. And this litigation particularly, because, we've had this electronic voting machine litigation that has, in fact, I would say, the courts have been even more considerate of the petitioner's side than the press has been. A legal threshold is much higher to reach for a petitioner than, for example, a public issue for the press. But it's the reverse in this case. So where the courts have actually given a series of orders. For instance, when since 2009, when electronic voting machines were used across, for general elections across the country, almost for all elections. So Subramanian Swamy went to court saying that, see, this is not transparent. We need voter verifiable or paper audit trail. And that is why, the Supreme Court in 2013 ordered that, see, we don't raise any questions as to the credibility of the Election Commission. They're doing a very salutary job. They've been doing a very good job. But what is the harm in adding this additional step? It will only give us a little more satisfaction for people, laypersons. And therefore, grudgingly, Election Commission had to implement the VVPAT. And then, once they have implemented the VVPAT, they were adamant they will not count the slips. So what was the point in actually implementing it? They said, no, the Supreme Court only asked us to implement. They never said we have to tally the counts with the electronic counts. And then, therefore, there had to be another round of litigation. In fact, in 2018, there were several petitions filed asking for tally of the paper trail counts with the electronic counts. Many of them were dismissed. Thankfully, some of the petitions that we had filed in 2019, early 2019, January 2019, notice was issued. At least the Supreme Court decided to hear it. Part of the reason was that our petitioners in this case, M.G. Devasayam and others, who had conducted elections as returning officers themselves, and they've had a history of engagement on this issue with the Election Commission. Therefore, the Supreme Court was kind of, forced its hand to hear these matters. And we had about a summary hearing for about 7 minutes on the issue. That's true. So the question was, how much tallying of the VVPAT counts should be done with the electronic counts, right? So there are electronic counts. There is always this suspicion that there is digital manipulation of elections. So, but that may be allayed by a tally of the paper trail counts. So how much of it should be counted? So the Election Commission stand was that it is enough if we count the VVPATs of one assembly segment in any given constituency. So that would that's one polling booth in any given assembly segment, right? An average assembly segment is an assembly constituency or an assembly segment within a parliamentary constituency. So an average assembly segment has about 250 polling booths. They said, so we do one per polling booth, that is sufficient. And what did they rely on? They relied on a particular report given by 3 independent scientists. One of them was associated with the Indian Statistical Institute. They presented this report to the Supreme Court belatedly after the Supreme Court asked them to produce the report, and then presented this as the ISI report. And then there was another story on how the Indian Statistical Institute was never officially engaged by the Election Commission. The process that was followed did not follow the rigors of the executive process that was there within the Indian Statistical Institute. So there was one scientist from the ISI Delhi. In fact, ISI is headquartered in Calcutta. ISI Delhi, and then one scientist from the CMR, the Chennai Mathematics Institute. 2 of them together wrote a report. And one of the premises was that, see, the entire election as a whole is one process. It's a homogeneous event. Therefore, totally you do 479 EVMs of the entire election. So there'll be thousands and lakhs of EVMs that are used across the country. You do 479, that was sufficient. And even this recommendation was not taken by the Election Commission. They instead watered it down to be one per assembly segment. I mean, for people who know how statistics works, it is 479 out of a larger number is not the same as 1 out of 250. So this is how this kind of was presented as though it had backing of the Indian Statistical Institute. Therefore, that was sufficient. And despite that, the Supreme Court said, no, you increase it by 5. So now the official line is that, so there has to be 5 polling stations that are randomly chosen for every assembly segment, and the VVPAT counts have to be tallied. So now, then that's when the second part starts, where I was, so I volunteered to be a counting agent for an independent candidate in the recently concluded Delhi Assembly elections. I went and saw how is it that this particular tally was done. So this question of the random selection of the polling booths is also something that the counting agents are not party to. So we just said that, so this selection had been done. It's not something that we could see. And our information was that the other election agents were also not shown that. So I don't know under whose watch this particular lots was picked. Of course, let's assume that, there are officials there. Not all officials are going to be in on any kind of manipulation. So it's possible that the lots are picked, and there's no question about whether that being a fair process. We saw it was just, and once this tallying was done, it was just impossible to count these small VVPAT slips. Every time you count, you always ended up with 15 more or 15 less. There was not once it tallied. So part of the reason is that they are so small. I mean, every time you count, you come with a different, in the sense it's very difficult to count. So it was, and that is why they had been resisting all along for all of these verifications. And there are always these things of, 20 not matching, 25 not matching, etc. And it is a question that the Election Commission needs to answer every now and then. It's a difficult question. Therefore, our suggestion was that it needs to be a proper ballot-like thing where the viewer, the voter can actually look at the ballot and satisfy himself and then put it himself, and then the counting happens. Like to a statistically significant, and our own statistical significance was that at least 30%, most of the 30% of the polling stations in most of the assembly segments have to be tallied with. So be that as it may, so that is the Election Commission VVPAT litigation saga. So the other larger question is, part of the reason why there are so many questions against the Election Commission is its clear conduct that is not in keeping with the expectation of it being a non-partisan institution, right? So one of it, there are structural issues, and there are going to be more deepening structural issues. One of them that Srinivas highlighted on, as digitization of elections happen, Election Commission's control over the process reduces even more, and its dependence on the government increases. And government is a partisan organism. As far as the process of elections is concerned, government is a partisan organism, and being dependent on the government, we've seen horror stories from the US. For instance, last time what happened in Florida, where I think Governor DeSantis himself was also the person who conducted the elections in Florida, and all the voter suppression, all of those stories that happened. And we saw that in Georgia, where it was widely believed Stacey Abrams had to won the gubernatorial election. Well, it didn't go that way, despite the exit polls showing that she'd have had the upper hand in 2018. So when you have the governments being in charge of elections, any process, any structure in any process or any sub process of the elections, you're going to have this problem where the structural control of elections by the Election Commission is diluted. And there are other structural issues of the commission constitution itself, where the chief election commissioner is appointed by the government. It's a long pending problem, and certainly of course, because it was long pending, people who were appointed were generally acceptable names, with a few exceptions. But now you see the current person who holds the office currently, Sunil Arora. In any other era, if he had been appointed, it would have raised a lot of eyebrows. He was involved in the Radia tapes, and he had documented links with the Sangh and all of that. But because we have a state where we are running after so many other issues, such as mob lynching, communal violence here and there. There's so many that those bigger issues. All of these never actually make the front pages, and all of these appointments are kind of passe. And the one, and we have, about the independence of the other election commissioners, they don't even have, for example, they don't even have constitutional protection against removal. They could be removed by the government. And two, there is also other problems that we see with Mr. Lavasa right now, where, he's in line to become the chief election commissioner, and he has accepted a overseas bank post, vice president of I think the Asian Development Bank. It is effectively demoting himself some 4 or 5 levels down, and we know what that is motivated by, and therefore, there are structural issues with the Election Commission. There are several questions that they have to answer, and unfortunately, we are not asking so many of those questions. Yeah, thanks, Suchitra.
Prasanna, thank you so much. As you were speaking, I don't know if you know this. There's this very famous Tamil play from the 1971 called Muhammad bin Tughlaq, where Muhammad bin Tughlaq reincarnates and comes back as the prime minister. And to eradicate corruption, he says, let's legalize corruption. And he makes an impassioned plea to the citizens of the country, saying that, these are the reasons why we should legalize corruption. In some ways, it's fiction is, I think, now stranger than fact. But we do have a lot of questions coming in. I hope all of you can stay and answer them. And in case you have to leave, please let us know. So I'll just quickly jump into the questions. So the questions are coming in terms of the electoral bonds, in terms of data privacy, but also a lot of individual questions. I will put individual questions to all of you, and if you others want to jump in, please do. One of the first questions that came in was for Poonam, was about your safety. One of the questions asks, do you feel safe reporting? Have you actually had threats from other journalists? We also have another questions which are very similar that also talk about why you are one of the few handful of journalists reporting on this, and why is it that others are not reporting?
Who wants? Should I go first?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is a threat. Whether I'm getting any threats, or am I scared or anything. I started my career 15 years ago in investigative journalism. Honestly, there were threats in the past I received, and I was given security as well for some of the stories. But now the concept of threat has changed. It's not physical threat anymore, nor is it that I'll get some call and tumko uda denge types. It's not that anymore. The biggest fear that a journalist in these days is facing a criminal case. That is how journalists are being quiet, because as we all understand that we do not have that much of legal support for legal cases. So the legal threat is the major threat that journalists are facing today. And that's one of the tools which is being used by the government, the administration, to keep you quiet. And I have already faced criminal charges. And if anybody asks me that whether I am scared of getting another criminal charge, because I'm out of that criminal charge, but I do not have any criminal case against me as of now. But am I scared? Yes, I will be very honest that yes, I do fear any criminal case. So anytime I do any story, I check with 10 sources. I call Prasanna, I call Srinivas if there is technical issue or legal issue. I call other lawyers, other sources, just to be correct in what I'm writing. So this is something I've been doing, but I'm doing 10 times more now. Every time I report on any story, be it elections, be it electoral bonds, be it PM cares or anything. So this is one thread I feel most of the journalists who are actually doing their job is facing. As far as physical threat is concerned, let me tell you, my friend, if anything goes wrong to me, there would be people who would really go ahead and put questions out in public domain and would really take up my issue. So physical threat is something I'm not really worried about.
Srinivas, Prasanna, do you guys want to respond or should we move on to the next question?
Well, I
Okay.
can certainly answer on the perspective of the lawyers as well. This kind of chilling effect certainly is there among lawyers, right? So particularly after the Bhima Koregaon arrests, etc., that there was a line that was breached. It was always understood that, see, lawyers are safe, right? All of these, there are not going to be UAPA charges on lawyers, right? So of course, lawyers will be representing clients of all kinds. I mean, whether it is people who are accused of terror charges, whether they are accused of Naxalism charges, you have to represent all of them. In fact, what is the point in giving people not even a fair trial and hanging them? I mean, lawyers play a role in actually defending a lot of them. Therefore, this line that lawyers are never touched was breached. I mean, in many ways, that was the first, particularly when Sudha Bhardwaj was arrested, that certainly caused a chilling effect. And that is now, slowly that is now being reinforced with what is happening with Prashant. The Supreme Court itself looking to use the contempt powers. Right. So this chilling effect is there for journalists, it's there for lawyers, and it is only getting worse.
Okay. So one thing I think I didn't touch when I was talking about data in elections was surveillance. Right. So the whole issue of all of this is you're looking at voter profiling, but you're not looking at state surveillance in Indian elections. The Indian state is listening to everyone. The structures that are being built that we like enough people have documented what 9/11 had done to surveillance in the US and across the world because US Federal Reserve's push of tracking banking transactions. But there hasn't been enough discussion and enough documentation of what Indian state has done post Bombay attacks and the rise of surveillance structures, including Aadhaar for the population, is important. Now, as someone who got into all of this by questioning Aadhaar, the first thing that happened to me was legal suits, which promised to put me in jail. Okay, so I was just documenting Aadhaar leaks, and the threat happened. I think I got a taste of it, but it was never taken to the court. I'm not sure when that will happen again, but that threat looms over. But most of us do fear that we are under surveillance, that the state is tracking you. In fact, it's not just the policing establishments, it's the bureaucrats themselves. For example, before the voter deletions that were going that have happened in Telangana, I was all over Twitter saying that look, that on the day of the Telangana elections, people will not be able to vote because the numbers show that there is a decrease of voters up to 4 million. Mr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, who was the CEO of UIDAI, went on live television on two TVs, on NDTV, CNBC, I think, where he said, look, if there were voter deletions, it's not our problem, it's the election commission's problem. Don't blame Aadhaar. He knew it was going to happen. Okay, it's documented. They knew what it is. It was, and I was very surprised that why is the CEO of UIDAI making these statements? There were no letters, nothing happened. I was just tweeting that, look, there is a problem. So, yes, the bureaucrats, the state machinery is always tracking you.
I'm just going to go to the next question.
Just before that, I'm sorry. Can I just add one line to that story, that the delightful story that Srinivas just said? After the elections, the following day, the chief electoral officer of Telangana came and apologized on live TV for all these deletions. Right, while he had been tracking through up until the election day that there will be so many deletions. Election Commission was in denial, and the following day they came and apologized on live TV. Yeah, I just wanted to complete that.
It feels like it's a gift that keeps on giving. So a bunch of other questions. Prasanna, we have again, this question is put to you, but again, Poonam and Srinivas, please jump in. The question is, if votes polled in the votes, if the votes polled in and the votes counted didn't match in any elections, how credible is the Indian elections?
Well, that's a fair question. But there are, because I saw that as a counting agent, it almost never matches. Right? It can never match because every time you count, you get a different result. The same set of VVPAT slips. It's impossible to humanly count those small slips. They stick to one another. It's impossible to know whether they are actually separated, stuck together, etc. So, this whole process of tallying the VVPAT slips is a farce. We need better slips. We need to implement the whole thing better.
Would either of you like to jump in, or should we move on to the next question?
So
I think so. Prasanna has said yeah. Go ahead, Srinivas. Because see, the point is that if the votes are not matching, and Election Commission is hell-bent on proving their point that the entire process is fair and there is no need of matching the VVPAT and the control unit electronic votes, then why the VVPAT is there at all? As Prasanna has already pointed out, moreover, that the ink doesn't stay there for long. On this particular aspect as well, Election Commission did not come out with a clear version for how long does the ink on the slip stays. We do not know. Why so much of opacity? Why can't they be more transparent? And Election Commission is supposed to be transparent and to conduct a fair and free election in the country.
So I just want to add to some of the issues on statistics and the procedures of the Election Commission. So I've been tracking other digital software systems that the Election Commission uses. For example, they install CCTV cameras in all polling booths. The claim is that, right? But if you go actually verify it, it's only in the polling booths which are known to have instances of disturbances. So if you actually go talk to the government machinery, they'll tell you that less than 10% of the polling booths will have those CCTV cameras. Legally, under the Election Commission rules, up to 45 days after the election, anyone, including the political party, can actually file an RTA and see the video footage of the polling booths. Okay, I actually filed one for India's largest constituency, Malkajgiri. I was asked to supply 10 lakh rupees for around 84 terabytes of data of just CCTV footage. Okay, so what the Election Commission claims versus what is on the ground are completely different. It's not a single monotonous activity because bureaucracy, states function differently across the country.
And that brings us to another question, which kind of is I'm rephrasing the question, but it kind of because the question is not clear. The question is trying to ask Srinivas. It's asking you about the idea of Aadhaar, idea of a few technocrats in India now pushing for and implementing these systems that are deeply flawed and hiding behind the language of technology, AI, blockchain. How do we hold these technocrats responsible? Second, how do we make, it's a two-part question. Second, they're asking, how do we make this information more accessible? Because once you have impressive people who have made money, who are on NDTV being interviewed about a series of issues they have no skills about, and yet they are seen as the pundits, right? So two-part question. One, the culture of technocrats, how do we hold them accountable? And second, how do we demystify the language of Aadhaar and everything else? So yeah, Srinivas, if you can go first, and then maybe Poonam and Prasanna can.
See, the problem with what they have done, post-liberalization in India, there is a clear lack of difference between the state and the capital. Okay, when we're talking about these technocrats, it's not that these technocrats are poor technologists who are working in some software company, right? These people are actually rich co-founders of companies, and you can't look at them merely as programmers or software engineers, because there is an entire class of software engineers, engineers inside ECIL, probably engineers in government run institutions, who would oppose these moves, professors in IIT. Okay, now the question is, how do we make these people accountable? I think the mechanisms do not exist. The mechanisms that you have in a democracy is to hold the state accountable. Now, in case of Aadhaar, what we essentially saw, all the marketing terms that were introduced were to just confuse people. And the set of people who got confused most is the political party. Like, no political party actually question what Aadhaar is. None of them. I mean, to be very frank, nobody knows what it is. Even now, the idea of pushing voting around Aadhaar is that uh, it's not a very isolated activity. It's there are a bunch of things that are being pushed in India, and the closest resemblance what's happening in India is actually Estonia. Estonia is a post-communist nation which got out of the Soviet Union and which digitized itself over a few years. It has a digital ID, a smart card, it has digital voting, it has digital health records. Everything is digitized in India, except Estonia has population, 1/10 of population of my city in India. Right? Like if you compare to any city, Estonia's population is probably 10% of Delhi, Bombay. You can't experiment, copy paste whatever has happened in a different country and paste it in India just so that you can make money. And it is very clear that all these people who are pushing these systems want to make money out of it, because it's the private sector which has to supply these systems at the end of the day. It's not like the government of India is building the blockchain. It will be some private entity which has to supply these systems when the need arises. The push for digitization in India, generally, not limited to elections, is to actually convert citizens into users. If you look at what has happened, by putting technology between you and the state, you can't directly interact with the state anymore. You have to go through a digital device, whether it's a EVM, whether it's Aadhaar to access welfare. There is always an intermediary called technology which has been placed in between you and the state. And this intermediary is controlled by the capital, by the market. Right? So the market has essentially taken control of the state, placed itself between you and the state. And now we're unable to question neither the market nor the state. And the only way now is to go question political parties. Okay, we need a new set of political parties which are open to questioning of institutions. It's not like if any political party in this country is saying Aadhaar is okay, I'm sorry, you haven't studied what it is, and you have been confused of what it is. There is enough proof now. It's been 10 years of Aadhaar. Prasanna can tell you more. Even the courts have said there is a clear problem. And in case of Aadhaar voter ID, the whole issue with Aadhaar, all of this was litigated. So was the National Population Register. None of the final judgments talk about it. Now the Election Commission wants a new law to link Aadhaar and voter ID again. Prasanna, please talk about this part.
Yeah, there's so much, lot to unpack there. I hope I can be brief. Going back to the one on accountability of all the people who are now pushing this technologies on several of these fronts, but in the garb of being volunteers, right? If it is a regular, okay, if there is a state that has tendered this work to a particular service provider, it's a different thing. Then we are able to litigate that. The language for that is in the law is clear. But when somebody says, see, I am volunteering this for the state, and then effectively forces the state to take a certain course, we don't have the language in the law to even push back against that. And that was one thing that we had a problem with in Aadhaar, and we continue to have problem with all of the India stack technologies being pushed. For instance, we also have this problem. They say that we are volunteers, right? Then I mean, what are your problem? I mean, we are just working for free. But then there is also state largesse in you being in the ears of the bureaucrat all the time, and you being having access to the inside of the government, and how that is also effectively state largesse, and that also has to be equitably distributed. It can't be just granted to you on a plate on a platter, and that's what effectively is being done. There is one group of lobbyists that are effectively in the ears of the government, enforcing a certain imagination of the affairs of how a country should be conducted onto the Indian state. And that is what we are facing now. And so therefore, I mean, there is legal academia that also needs to work and trying to find the language to push back against this. We don't have one.
Poonam?
I think so. Prasanna and Srinivas, they have covered it all. And Aadhaar is a huge subject, so there is no end to it. I think so. This is enough for now.
Okay, so we have a really interesting question that has come up. I'll put it in, and I'll let one of you guys, any of you here, to answer it. This one deals with of late, India has seen the rise of the political intermediary or entrepreneurial class made of people like Prashant Kishore, who often make huge sums of money. It quotes a bunch of amounts of money. I'm not sure. I have not had time to fact check any of this, so I'm not going to mention the amount. How do you reconcile the rise of these political entrepreneurs within the Indian electoral process? How fair is the Indian system when someone like Mr. Kishore helps both the BJP, the Congress? Again, I've not been able to fact check any of this. Is the point they're trying to make is that through the figure of a political entrepreneur like these political consultancies who take vast sums of money and advise a series of political parties across ideological spectrums, also apparently have access to data that is being collected. How would you reconcile these figures? Should there be legislation? Is there legislation to regulate this? If so, why is it not there? What can we do?
It's the money. Okay, it's the money that allows it, and electoral bonds have technically gave them a rocket fuel, right? It's rocket fuel for Indian elections to be corporatized, right? It's all of these terms, the trends that you're seeing is essentially MBA class, the set of consultants who essentially realize that there is an entire market called the Indian election where political parties spend thousands of crores to win. And that's what has happened with Cambridge Analytica. I mean, they're not different in any ways. So the question to ask is, forget the political entrepreneurs. It's actually the money and the politics around it which is driving these things. So it's important we question the election commission on that more than questioning Prashant Kishore. Forget Prashant Kishore, forget Mr. Nilekani, forget Mr. Zuckerberg also. It's the election commission, end of the day, which is required to implement the Representation of People's Act, and it is not implementing it. When it comes to Facebook, they're allowing them to self-regulate themselves. When it comes to Aadhaar voter ID, they're allowing the UIDAI to do whatever they want, delete voters without implementing the Representation of People's Act. And even in case of the electoral bond, the entire act itself is illegal because it was a money bill. So it's important we take back institutions, demand accountability from institutions. And there are several structural issues, but the only way these are going to be looked at is when you can engage with the institution. In fact, if people really want how to do this, I would actually recommend that you read Ornit Shani's book, How India Became Democratic, because she actually documented what was happening in India in 1947 when, as we became independent, we also started enrolling everyone into electoral rolls, and the set of issues that we are facing now, whether it's delimitation, whether it's voter deletions, not including minorities, the whole issue of NRC, for example, and de-voters, all of these have happened in 1947, and we are just going back in time. The only way to do is how citizens at that point of time engaged with the state. And I think it's beautifully documented. You have to organize, you have to keep on sending them letters, you have to continuously question them. And questioning Nilekani or Prashant Kishore will not help.
One of the other, just taking off from where he left, one of the structural issues that we have is we have all of these single point failures. Election Commission is a single point failure. It is not, it's not federated enough. So, which is part of the reason why you have somebody like Prashant Kishore who can say he has one source to get all of this data from, potentially. That if he had to do it, if there were independent processes across several states, right? It might be more expensive, certainly, because we will lose economies of scale, but there will be no single points of failure. And this is something that we need to talk about. I mean, much like how when you say market failure, you break up companies. With the state failure, you may need to break up certain institutions. I mean, it is a case where our elections process is failing from the top, and we may need to break it up.
We have already passed the time limit. If all three of you are willing, or if some of you are willing, can we still put more questions to you? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. The next question is looking at, why are electoral bonds unconstitutional? How much time will the Supreme Court take to take up the electoral bond issue? So this is a bunch of, I'm just clubbing all of these questions together so all of you can answer. Second, your conversation is, this conversation is making me deeply uncomfortable and scared. Shouldn't this be on the front channels of every newspaper and every television? Instead, we are talking about death, murder, and suicide. So yeah, so again, the point being, electoral bonds, is it unconstitutional? Why is the Supreme Court taking more time? And why aren't the journalists, or why aren't the media reporting on this in a regular way to hold these institutions accountable? Poonam, would you like to start?
Yeah. Maybe Prasanna can talk about the Supreme Court aspect and the unconstitutional thing, and then I can pick it up from there and go to the media.
Yeah, okay. So on the unconstitutional bit, right, there are very few open and shut constitutional cases before the Supreme Court. And electoral bonds is really one. Where you are, I mean, as to funding of elections, transparency in the electoral process is bedrock of our electoral democracy, and democracy has been declared to be a basic structure of a basic feature of the Indian Constitution, which constitutes the basic structure. So anything that compromises the nature of our democracy is definitely destructive of basic structure, and therefore, I mean, it's first of all, it's even the final decision, in my view, is open and shut. But certainly open and shut as to whether it needs to be heard expeditiously. And we've seen that, I mean, there are several other cases. I mean, electoral bonds is another case where the Supreme Court has decided by not deciding. They've actually let one general elections run and several state elections run. I mean, that, and the fact that this kind of judicial evasion, as Gautam Bhatia has put it in several times in his writings. So they've evaded answering this question. I mean, this is an uncomfortable question that they have to answer, but they've just evaded it. And yeah, I mean, it only reinforces our general sort of mood of gloom that we are seeing. But we don't know when it will be taken up, and whether it will be taken up at all before the 2024 elections. We have habeas corpus petitions pending. Right? I mean, habeas corpus petitions can be pending, but then you will still need to hear for 20 hours a man who you want to sentence for ₹1 fine. And this is what we have currently. So therefore, I don't know whether it will be heard at all and when it will be heard.
Well, as Prasanna has put that, I'm not that hopeless, Prasanna. I'm pretty much hopeful that it will come before 2024 elections. But the point here is that this is an important issue. It has been talked about, it has been reported in some section of the media, not the mainstream media, but it is an important issue. Whether media picks it up or not, when a PIL has been filed before the Supreme Court, they are supposed to work on it, hear it, and pass judgment. But it is pending. And to your and we all are not surprised now, since the Bihar elections are around the corner. Another tranche of electoral bonds are going to be sold in October. So the process, as far as the government is concerned, they are going ahead with their process. Nobody is going to stop them. But the Supreme Court is just not ready to work on it. Now, as we all understand that most of the institutions are allegedly compromised. Now, the only place where we can go and put our grievances, place our grievances and expect some result is the Supreme Court. Now, if Supreme Court is not hearing us, then as a citizen of this country, we do not know what to do. And this is one thing I've been discussing with the ADR group who have actually filed the petition in the court. They are equally upset and they are equally, hopeless about the fact that they do not know how to go ahead and make this matter come up for hearing. And this is one issue none of us can actually answer. And as Prasanna rightly said, we do not know when and how it will happen. And then the part which we are all concerned that why mainstream media is not picking up the issue, or media in general is not picking up the issue. Let me just tell you here briefly. When I first reported electoral bonds in 2018, I really there was a lot of effort was put into explain the issue to the people. They couldn't really understand the issue, so we did a series of stories to make people understand what exactly electoral bonds are and why it is important for all of us and why we need to notice this issue. There were questions being raised by different parts of the people as to why opposition is not bringing up the issue, why they are not talking about it if it is such a big problem. I could only answer them that it is opposition who is supposed to decide whether they are able to understand or not. I really doubt. So Suchitra, the problem is not just one side. Like it is a gamut of problem, and as a journalist, we also learn, we understand the issue, then we address, put it in public domain, and we keep on working on it. Thankfully, many of us are aware of it, but maybe I do not know why mainstream media is, maybe I know, but I don't want to say here why they do not want to pick this issue. But as far as public are concerned and those who are really worried about the current situation, at least they come forward and talk about it and discuss about this issue.
Srinivas, would you like to jump in or shall we?
I mean, see, there's one thing that I've noticed. As someone who's been documenting, like Poonam, like everyone else, with actual records, right? Like when I claim things, I'm actually doing it based on documents produced by a government institution. And I am sharing these documents to the press. When I interact with the media, when I try to actually get this out, it's rarely that the media will even look at the documents, even when you share it to them. And I will not entirely blame it on the media, but there has been a lack of will from the political parties to also actually investigate. When we look at the voter deletions in AP and Telangana, they knew lakhs of voters have been deleted since 2015. They've approached the courts. I think multiple cases have been filed in the Hyderabad High Court. The cases were being heard, but there was no evidence. There were claims on either end. Deletions happened. There were wrong deletions. The Election Commission would claim that we have done everything by the book. But nobody put the effort to actually go inspect the documents to see what happened. And eventually, when I did that, when I actually got out the evidence that this is what happened, until a politician will take up the issue, the media is not ready to report it. And even when I was warning that this was going to happen, the only question the media would ask me is, what is your credibility that we should hear you or we should publish whatever you say? I'm like, no, don't publish me, but publish whatever these documents say. These documents were produced by the Election Commission of India and the Government of India. So that idea of evidence or critical thinking has been lost, and media, politicians, and other institutions are equally responsible for it. And we probably have to explain these terms in very fundamental level, as Poonam was pointing out, right? Like the delimitation commission issue, nobody understands the whole complexity of Aadhaar, NPR, delimitation commission, and voter deletions. There are several independent laws. All of these are independent. The delimitation commission law will be different. So will be the Aadhaar voter ID linking. So will be NPR. But all of these are being done by the same institution, the Government of India. It's the centralization of power and money and institutions that is something that we are unable to explain, because these are not tangible issues. For a Muslim, I'm bringing that community up because of the NRC issue. It was apparent only after Assam that what they could lose, that they will be detained and sent to jail. Right? So until it becomes a tangible issue, it's really hard to explain to the common public.
I just want to quickly add here that these are complex issues. Electoral bonds, CAA, NRC, and a common person really face difficulties in understand. So as media, we do our job, but at the same time, the opposition is also need to do their job, talk to people, pass on the message. So a weak opposition is also to a great extent is responsible for this problem.
As we're trying to come everything much about the time limit, so I'm going to ask. I'm going to kind of. I've not been able to address many of the questions raised, but I will kind of put the last questions, and you could also add your concluding remarks with it. We got a series of questions about what can the common man do. One of the questions that came in now says, now that we have this information and we are disturbed and we are concerned, what is someone who's an voter, who's not a lawyer, who's not a journalist, who's not a researcher, what do they do? So that is one question. So perhaps we can use this question as a concluding question and also as your concluding thoughts, and then we can bring this to a conclusion today.
Well, I can say this much, that a person, as we have spoken about the fact that I have said the same thing in another webinar, that we need to stop talking about people. We don't need to discuss people. We need to discuss issues. We need to bring to the people the problems which matter to each one of us. And that is how to create awareness. That's how we can contribute from our end. If Poonam knows the issue, she can write and publish it in some platform. But if person A also understands the same issue and is scared of this issue, he or she should go ahead and create awareness among the people in his surrounding. As a citizen, that would be a big help, because I know that a person who cleans my car, he only asked me, madam, what is CAA? What is wrong in it? Why shouldn't it be brought? He asked me and I explained him. When I explained him, he understood the matter, and then he said, thank you, I was not aware of this aspect of it. So this is what we can do as a citizen of the country. We do not need to be a journalist. We do not need to be a lawyer. All we need to become is an aware citizen.
See, I think what has essentially happened is political parties have become weak because of their own structural issues of how they were undemocratic to begin with. Now, the only way to challenge the state is you take away your power and not try to give it to political parties, but actually probably unionize, go talk to unions. Unions are actually powerful. In fact, religious institutions are powerful too. We haven't seen the kind of rise of the actual, how do I put it, probably learned uh, at these moments, or even the um, even the Hindus, right? Like the Hindus who probably do not want to identify with Hindutva. Uh, these institutions, these religious organizations, they haven't come together. I think the better way probably is to look out for alternate avenues away from the mainstream institutions. It's probably unions, religious institutions, but be sure how you're getting into. I think one of the set of people that who came out post the CAA protest were actually students. I think that's a class which realizes how to organize. They're organized, and the student groups which came up post the CA protest, the state is actively trying to quell them down. So it's try to organize, and there is no one direction. I think wherever you can get organized, if you can get organized at a RWA within your society, I think you should do it.
That pretty much covers most of what I have to say. We have to certainly look at creative resistance, right? So it is, as people say, the state never practices democracy. It is the people that always practice democracy, right? So we will need to practice democracy. It comes with practice, and we need to practice creative resistance. Where the state has gotten miles ahead in terms of its own creativity, we will need to match up. So I don't have the answers. But certainly that's a question that's still open.
Poonam, Srinivas, and Prasanna, thank you so much for joining us. After end of this live broadcast, what we will do is we will make a reading list of works of Poonam's, Srinivas's, and Prasanna's that can be circulated. The way it's not just a conversation, it's also you have a body of work that our speakers today have done over the past few years. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll make sure that this conversation is transcribed and also translated with regional languages and circulated. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Suchitra. Thank you, Prasanna, Srinivas.